In every generation, people grow up believing that their government exists to protect their dreams. They believe that the system above them is stable, controlled, and built with their best interests in mind. But what if the very machine designed to protect your future is silently stealing it? What if the slow, creeping force that is draining your savings, shrinking your salary, and stretching your monthly struggles is not an accident, not a natural economic storm, but a deliberate tool, carefully used, repeated through history, and disguised behind complicated words? This story begins where almost every financial tragedy begins, with trust. Ordinary people trust their currencies. They trust that the money they earn today will hold the same value tomorrow. They trust that when they save, when they work, when they plan, the system will reward them. But inflation, slow, invisible, unannounced, is the quiet thief that enters your home without breaking the door. It steals not your money itself, but your purchasing power, your time, your effort, your years of labor. And the most shocking part? The government knows this. They use it. They depend on it. Picture a nation in the early morning light. Markets opening, workers rushing, factories humming. Everything seems normal. But beneath this rhythm lies a dangerous truth. The price is rising, the rent increasing, the groceries getting more expensive. This is not natural inflation. This is engineered inflation, designed inflation, a tool governments have used for decades to solve their own problems, not yours. Because inflation is not just a number. It is not just a percentage announced on a news channel. It is a weapon, silent, bloodless, but incredibly destructive. It allows governments to borrow endlessly, avoid accountability, fund wars, cover mistakes, and print money without facing the immediate consequences. And while they save themselves, the public pays the price. Every paycheck shrinks, every saving melts, every dream gets a little further away. As you listen to this story, you must understand one thing. Inflation is not the villain you were taught it is. It is far more dangerous. A villain you can see can be confronted, but a villain disguised as normal, a villain you are told to accept, a villain hidden inside everyday life. That villain is unstoppable, unless you see it. And that is where our journey begins. With a simple but terrifying question, if governments can create money from nothing, why do citizens have to work their entire lives to earn it? The tension grows as we reveal the cracks forming underneath the world's economies. The rising cost of living, the weakening power of currency, the disappearing middle class. These are not coincidences. They are consequences, not of global chaos, but of deliberate design. Inflation is the perfect crime. No alarms, no fingerprints, no clear culprit. Just millions of people slowly growing poorer without realizing who took their wealth. And now, for the first time, we pull back the curtain. In this documentary, you will discover how inflation became a tool of control, how governments learned to use it to erase debt, reset economies, and quietly shift power away from citizens. You will learn how it affects your life every single day, even when you don't notice it. And most importantly, you will understand why your future is at risk, unless you recognize the system built around you. This is not just a story of numbers and charts. This is the story of your future and the invisible force stealing it. To understand how governments use inflation as a weapon, we must step back, far back, into the pages of history. Because inflation is not new, it is ancient. It has been the favorite trick of kings, emperors, dictators, and modern governments for thousands of years. The faces changed, the flags changed, the speeches changed, but the method remained the same. Centuries ago, rulers didn't have printing presses. They couldn't create money out of thin air, not directly. But they had another trick. They would shave tiny amounts of precious metal from gold and silver coins. At first, people didn't notice. A few shavings didn't seem like much, but over time, coins became lighter, thinner, weaker, yet they carried the same official value. That was inflation in its earliest form. The people paid the price while rulers funded wars, palaces, and debts. Fast forward to modern times. Technology evolved, but the strategy stayed identical. Instead of shaving coins, governments expanded the money supply. Instead of physically altering currency, they digitally created it. A few keystrokes, a few decisions made behind closed doors, and billions, sometimes trillions, appeared in the system. The public rarely noticed because the effects were slow, delayed, and masked by expert language and comforting reassurances. But behind every crisis we blame on the economy, inflation was quietly operating in the shadows. In the 1970s, the U.S. abandoned the gold standard, freeing governments from the last physical limit on money creation. From that moment, every currency became faith-based, its value depending only on trust. And the people were never told the full consequences of this shift. The moment money lost its anchor, inflation became a permanent resident of every nation. Prices rose not because goods became more valuable, but because money became weaker. Governments learned something powerful. If you control money, you control reality. Inflation allowed leaders to dissolve their own debt without ever announcing a single tax increase. It allowed them to promise more than they could afford. It allowed them to spend recklessly while telling citizens everything was under control. Every time a government printed money to solve its problems, it quietly transferred the cost to its people. Because inflation is a reverse tax. A tax you can't see, a tax you can't vote against, a tax you can't escape. Every time your grocery bill increases, every time rent jumps, every time savings lose value, the government is benefiting. Their debts shrink in real terms. Their spending becomes easier. Their political survival becomes more secure, and the average person suffers in slow motion. But inflation doesn't rise alone. It brings companions: poverty, desperation, inequality. The middle class, once the backbone of nations, becomes fragile. Savings become meaningless. Long-term planning becomes impossible. The dream of owning a home drifts further away. And the rich, they grow richer because inflation devalues cash, but inflates assets, properties, stocks, businesses. Those who own assets thrive. Those who rely on salaries drown. This is why inflation is not simply an economic phenomenon. It is a transfer of power from the people to the government, from workers to elite asset holders, from savers to borrowers. If inflation were natural, governments would fight it with everything they have. But they don't. They manage it. They manipulate it. They even target it. They intentionally aim for inflation every year because they know that a slow, steady weakening of currency benefits them. And as long as the public believes inflation is normal, the game continues. In country after country, year after year, the same pattern repeats. A crisis hits. Governments print money. People cheer, thinking the state saved them. Then months later, prices explode. Savings disappear. And the public wonders, what happened? What happened was inflation. What happened was predictable. What happened was engineered. And now, in the modern era of digital banking, endless money creation, and economic instability, inflation has become more dangerous than ever. Governments rely on it more heavily, more frequently, more aggressively, because they know that as long as citizens stay distracted, as long as the game stays complex, as long as inflation stays invisible, they can keep using it to control the future. But every weapon, no matter how powerful, eventually backfires. And that brings us to the next chapter. What happens when inflation spirals out of control? What happens when governments lose the very power they abused? And what does that mean for your future? The consequences are coming. The question is, will you be ready? The story now reaches its most critical moment. Because inflation, once unleashed, does not remain a quiet thief forever. It evolves, it accelerates, and eventually it transforms into something far more dangerous than rising prices. It becomes a force that rewrites the destiny of entire nations. When governments push inflation too far, the system begins to strain. First slowly, then all at once. You see it in the hollowed-out faces of families whose salaries can no longer feed them. You see it in businesses shutting their doors because costs explode overnight. You see it in currencies collapsing, savings evaporating, and people turning desperate. This is the final stage of the inflation machine, the moment when the controlled burn becomes an uncontrollable wildfire. Look at history. Argentina, Weimar Germany, Zimbabwe, Venezuela. These nations did not fall in a single day. They collapsed drip by drip, through years of inflation that governments pretended to manage. Until one day, the truth could no longer be hidden. The value of money collapsed faster than people could earn it. Entire economies evaporated. The middle class disappeared. Trust shattered, and in every case, governments said the same words. We didn't see this coming, but they did. They always do, because inflation is not an accident, and hyperinflation is not a surprise. It is the destination of a road governments chose long ago. The road of endless printing, endless borrowing, endless denial. Now, in the modern world, the warning signs are appearing again. Not just in one country, everywhere. Debt levels are exploding. Currencies are weakening. Cost of living is rising faster than wages. Governments are printing more money than at any time in history. And global people are feeling the pressure, the fear, the tightening grip around their futures. This is the moment when the inflation machine becomes something even more dangerous, a tool for control. When money loses value, people panic. When people panic, governments step in with solutions. Centralized digital currencies, tighter financial regulations, new economic controls, promises of stability, all of it presented as rescue. None of it given freely. Because when a system collapses, the ones who created the collapse often reappear as heroes, offering new systems, new laws, new powers. Inflation becomes the crisis and the excuse. But the real question is not what governments will do. The real question is what you can do. Because the ending of this story is not written yet. The consequences are real, but so are the choices. Understanding inflation is the first step. Recognizing the game is the second. And preparing yourself is the final one. If your money loses value every year, then money alone cannot be your future. People who survive inflationary periods across history all had one thing in common. They did not rely on a weakening currency. They invested in assets, skills, knowledge, and opportunities that grew while money shrank. They learned the truth that governments never teach. Inflation destroys money, not value, not potential, not the people who see it coming. This documentary is not meant to scare you. It's meant to wake you up. Because inflation is not a temporary phase. It is the design of the modern world. And the only way to protect your future is to rise above the system, not sink within it. As the world enters a new age of economic uncertainty, two groups will emerge. Those who waited for things to get better, and those who prepared for things to get worse. The future will not reward those who trust blindly. The future will reward those who understand the truth. Governments don't protect wealth. They extract it. Inflation is not a mistake. It is a strategy. And your financial survival depends not on what happens, but on whether you saw it coming. As the screen fades and the music rises, one final message appears. When money loses value, time becomes priceless. And those who understand the system create their own future.